And of course, also the journalists were assaulted yesterday at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. We just want to get a feel of what our panelists will have to say about this particular development. We thought actually the court were very clear that he should be back in the country. But with the recent developments, we wonder what is really happening to the rule of law. Allow me to introduce to you our panelists officially. We have Dr. Simiyu, who is a member of parliament from Tongaren. Also, we do have Dr. Otende Amolo, who is a member of parliament from Rarieda. We do have with us Senator Aaron Cheriot as well, Senator from Kericho. We have Jared Okalo, who is a member of parliament from Nyando, and Senator Kimani Matangi, who is a senator from Kiambu. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
All right, looking at the development, we'll begin with you, Dr. Otende Amolo, with what really happened yesterday. What was your expectation?
Well, first of all, allow me, as usual, to say good morning to the nation. And allow me to say that on this occasion I missed the drama. I'm usually in the middle of the drama because I'm one of the lawyers for Miguna. But my nephew had an accident, so I was only communicating with my colleagues on phone. And from what I understand, first I was able to monitor the processes. They kept Miguna for almost 10 hours at the airport. My other colleagues were there, and His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga also went there. They still did not release him. Eventually, because there was coverage of what was going on, they chased the media and actually injured some of the media, some of the journalists, and I'm sure we'll be seeing that as well. And they eventually decided to ground an Emirates plane that had already taxied off.
Yes.
It was brought back, they opened the doors, and a contingent of police officers attempted to force Miguna into the plane. But true to his form, and I thank him for that, he stood his ground. He refused to board that plane because the international laws about how you transport a person, and you cannot just take someone and put them in a plane. Either if they are traveling of their own volition, then they can travel, but you cannot force a person to travel. But if they are not traveling of their own volition, then it can only be a deportation. Now, if it's a deportation, first, there must be a deportation order. Secondly, there must be a way of securing passage to the places being deported to. And thirdly, there must be people who accompany that person to ensure that they are deported to that destination. That did not happen. So I think, eventually, as I understand it, the pilot of the Emirates plane yielded to what he rightly knows to be the law and left Miguna. Now, coming back to the issue, I think it is a very sad show of impunity on the part of government. It is absolute impunity in defiance of express court orders. There are at least 2 court orders that direct not only the return of Miguna's passport, they also direct that the government ensures safe passage into the country, and in fact goes ahead to require that the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights facilitates that. It is also in direct defiance of the Constitution. I've said this consistently both in court and in this show, that Article 14 of the Constitution is clear, Article 16 of the Constitution is clear, and any argument that Miguna lost his citizenship is null and void, and that is why the court has dismissed those arguments. But more importantly now, I think I saw some kind of argument, including some of the journalists asking that is it possible that Miguna refused to release his Canadian passport so that he could be issued with a temporary visa so that he could come into the country, and that he only offered his national ID. I think it should be very clear first that under Section 24 of the Immigration Act, travel documents are not limited to passports. Travel documents, Section 24(1) says every citizen is entitled to a travel document which will include a passport or other documents. So you can actually travel on documents other than a passport. That's number one. And it's important to understand that even you, Debarl, if today you went to Amsterdam and you boarded a plane, and in between Schiphol and Nairobi, you cannot locate your passport, you will not be returned at the airport merely because you cannot locate your passport. if you can be able to demonstrate that you are Kenyan by any other means. You will be issued with what under section 24G and E is called emergency travel document. You will be facilitated to enter this country. So the question that Miguna did not issue, did not produce his Canadian passport is hogwash. He could have been issued with emergency documents to enter. Secondly, the government itself is in possession of his passport. It was seized illegally. The court directed that it be returned. They returned it after perforating it. You know, and that means it's not a passport that can be used. In fact, they didn't return it. They produced it in court perforated. Miguna is not in possession of it. So the same institution that is demanding that you produce the passport is the same institution that has it and is also capable of giving you another. But more importantly also, it is important to understand that even if he didn't have his Kenyan passport, he didn't have his Kenyan ID, he didn't have his Canadian passport, the court had directed that the government facilitate his re-entry. So even if he had nothing, they were obligated to facilitate his re-entry. So I think that this is not only a demonstration of absolute impunity. From where I sit, it shakes me to the core in terms of my belief in the good faith of His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, his handshake with His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, and on the commitment of government to abide by the law. A committee of national dialogue, an initiative for national dialogue must be built on firm constitutional foundations of democracy. It must not be built on situations where you see impunity by the police, which is what we are trying to run away from. Ultimately, in my view, some of the actions we are seeing suggest that in the roadmap to genuine national dialogue, there are many people in high places, in the police, in immigration, in the Department of Internal Security, who will have to be relieved of their duties and be made to account if we are to set up a proper foundation for national dialogue.
Right. Let us see from Dr. Eselesimo. Good morning.
Morning. I think that goes to show that nothing has changed really, despite the handshake and all that, because there should have been some goodwill to show that actually the handshake is going to work by obeying the court order, because this is just the usual impunity of not obeying court orders. Because in any case, our constitution now allows dual citizenship. So demanding that he surrenders his Canadian passport or gives them his Canadian passport is neither here nor there. What they should have done is they should have had all the documents there for him to fill in for dual citizenship, which is allowed by law. They should have had the documents there so that he fills them in and eventually they return his Kenyan passport and all that. So all this just shows that really nothing has changed.
Right. Aaron Cheriot, isn't this just an utter violation of international law and, of course, defiance of court orders as well?
Well, Debarl, good morning also to Kenyans who are watching us this morning. I do not have the detailed kind of understanding of this matter that my colleague here, Otiende, has, because having acted for Miguna and also followed the events that have led up to this, he has that kind of understanding. But what worries me the most, I'll answer your question, but what worries me the most are two things fundamentally. One is generally in terms of our airport security. World over, airports are areas of high security that you do not wish to see the kind of scenes that you are watching this morning, where you have people that are not either immigration or airline officials running around, and journalists having that kind of access, and all that pushing and shoving. It sets a very bad image for us internationally as we try to build on the image of JKIA to make it an internationally recognized airport. And when you have this kind of scenes, as a leader, it leaves me worried and not happy, because I feel this should have been handled better. If there were things that were not clear to immigration officials on how to either allow Miguna in or deny him, certainly this wasn't the way to go about it, in my very humble opinion. Secondly, also is a very worrying issue. Under IATA protocol, you do not do what was done to that EK 719, if I get the figures right, that Emirates flight that had already taxied on the way, and the pilot had already gotten clearance. When you recall an airplane from the taxiway to come back and take on board a passenger, there are certain grounds, and there must be good reason as to why you do that. When the pilot finally gets home to Dubai this morning and he files his flight report, I do not think Emirates will take this kindly, that you can just call their planes from the runway. You know, this is done out of mutual respect and consent. There are certain things that you must give way to when you allow people to land and take off from your airports. And therefore, that is also another thing that is greatly unfortunately. Thirdly, and finally, I do not know, this is risky, but allow me to say that consistently we continue to see this kind of scenes, and what they end up doing is that they end up to give Miguna a larger than life status, which I do not think is an intention of either the state or the opposition, because he seems to enjoy this kind of drama much as it is unfortunate, and the people who are serving it to him are giving it also to him bit by bit in small enjoyable doses, because he loves this kind of attention much as it's unfortunate. So I cannot claim to have the kind of understanding that Otiende has. Therefore, I'm also watching in shock and dismay, hoping to get a better understanding as a day.
What would be the rhyme and reason why the government is putting all this drama, you know, in the airport? We have the court orders that he should be back in the country, that of course his deportation was illegal. So we don't understand what is the rhyme and reason for having all this drama at the airport.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Debarl. I'm glad that my brother Cheriot, Honorable Cheriot, who has missed 2 debates, has come back with a new paradigm. He sees more clearer and he punches holes where necessary.
He was on a recess. He went to reflect.
He must have spent most of his time with Nasser Deren, you know. Yeah.
Not really.
Well, thank you, Debarl. What happened yesterday at JKIA is utterly uncalled for. And picking from what my brother, Honorable Cheriot, has alluded to, we are at the process of escalating the international airport, JKIA, so that we have direct flights from Nairobi all the way to New York and back. And that is going to boost our economic standards in this country, which is currently at its lowest ebb. Having said that, we have international organizations, IATA, UFTA. IATA would look into several issues before an airport is either upgraded or downgraded. And what happened yesterday is one of the reasons as to why IATA or UFTA, Universal Federation of Travel Agency Association, would quickly downgrade an international airport. So we did not really need 1,000 police officers to handle Dr. Miguna. And we did not really need the kind of drama that was witnessed at the airport to prove any point to anyone at all. Now, what we had expected before Miguna's arrival was complete compliance by the court orders. Mm-hmm. The court orders are very clear that Miguna's entry was to be facilitated by the government, witnessed by Kenya National Human Rights Commission. Kenya National Human Rights Commission agents were there at the airport in good time. The government was actually given the court orders, so they cannot say that they were not privy to any existence of a court order. They were well aware. And all these documents were in the custody of both the government and Kenya National Human Rights Commission, and including his lawyers. So if a government can blatantly disobey a court order, of course they've done this in the past, but we thought with the golden handshake that we were going to look at things quite differently. But, you know, each and every day we look at things remaining the same. So that is a harsh indictment. Now, the Constitution, which Dr. Tiende has touched on briefly, if you read Article 12 of the Kenya's Constitution, holding a passport is an entitlement, and any other travel document. It is an entitlement to a citizen of this country. And that particular, if you move to Article 13, it says if anyone was a citizen prior to the promulgation of the Constitution, you remain a citizen. So whether Miguna previously renounced his citizen, but we know that in 2013, Miguna was a Kenyan citizen. So whether it was received by default or by some good means, it doesn't matter. The law is clear that anyone before the promulgation remains to be a Kenyan citizen. Now, reading that conjunctively with Article 24, yes, there are certain caveats that can be put either in acquisition of passport or suspension of passport or any travel document or even citizenship. But it says that you must prove that beyond any reasonable doubt to a court of law. And that is what the government was trying to do.
Thank you.
They quickly moved to High Court, lost in High Court. Of course, there were conservatory orders that were gotten to have Miguna's status quo retained. Then they moved to the Court of Appeal and lost again. And from what we know, they haven't moved to the Supreme Court on any matter touching on legalese. So what we do understand is that Miguna is legally a Kenyan. Now, they were saying that they needed his Canadian passport in order to facilitate his entry into the country. And you ask yourself, this is the same government that is keeping Miguna's travel document in the name of a Kenyan passport. Why does it become so easy for them to ask for a Canadian passport instead of producing the legitimate Kenyan passport that they are holding? So these are fundamental questions that I think will come into play going forward. Finally, we must approach issues of handshake with utmost good faith. I do believe that His Excellency Raila Odinga, meeting with His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, they decided to put everything aside and approach the issues bedeviling this nation as a one unitary body. And I wanted to believe that everyone brought his cards above the table and there is nothing that is now hidden. And if issues touching on NASA supporters or NASA adherents, including entry into a country, can still be fundamental issues to a government, then I think we need to revisit and reevaluate, step back, retool and reflect on these issues pertaining to this handshake.
Thank you. Right. Wamatangi, very briefly as we agreed.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly. I will be as brief as I've always been.
Is there a new day?
You know, Debarl, first I also say good morning to our viewers, our fellow Kenyans. And it's a beautiful Tuesday morning. Three keywords I may want to refer to in this debate. First, going by what the lawyer for Miguna said, who is in this panel, that is Otiende Amolo. He said that Miguna's old passport was invalidated. That's word number one. Two, in the court order, it's by admission that the lawyer also says, and concurrence here by Jared, that the order says facilitate Miguna's entry. And so the question one we may want to ask is this, and I'm coming from that angle to ask probably, or to wonder, is the drama necessary? Was it created intentionally, or is it probably, as Senator Cheriot was saying, just intended to serve the public consumption of drama and probably Miguna's profile, if you say so? Because ask yourself, if the order says government facilitate his entry, does that equal to
saying that he should not apply either for a passport, reapply for the passport if it has been invalidated, does it mean that if he has to come into the country, he does not have to proffer his Canadian passport to allow him to have a visa and come in and make his case when he's inside there? Because what the order simply says is facilitate his entry. I mean, if he came in with his Canadian passport, if that's what he's having right now, and it is stamped and he's told you have a visa now to enter into the country, and you can come when you're inside the country, then make your case. When you're there, either go to court, go and reapply for your Kenyan passport, because Debarl, some few issues which are constitutional and which are also known in the public domain, we cannot deny. One, ask any Kenyan who is in the diaspora now, and ask any of these gentlemen sitting here, on the provisions under dual citizenship. And this is a reality. Most Kenyans prior were forced to denounce their citizenship for them to acquire citizenship in those countries outside. And that our new constitution absolutely also recognized that. What most Kenyans did, and so I've said clearly and truthfully, ask anyone in the diaspora what most people in the diaspora did, and actually some didn't know. I spoke to some of them later. And they didn't know that you have to reapply for your passport after our new constitution, such that you can hold your foreign passport, but you have reapplied for the local one, and it is as simple as that. Now that when Miguna left, there was then the prevailing circumstances, and his passport was invalidated. Those were the issues of then. And then now there is compliance to a court order which is required for that matter. And I don't think that anybody is keen on or intent on disobeying a court order, as long as, and that's my belief, as long as a process is followed. But if I come to the airport and I know that my other passport was renounced, just like every other person does holding a foreign passport, I'll come to the counter and I'll give my passport. Do you know, Debarl, and Kenyans need to know this, that many foreigners today can arrive at our airport without a visa and apply for a visa at the counter, at the airport. So if you come and give your passport there, it doesn't matter what your name is, whether your name is Miguna or Wamatangi or John Keane or whoever. Whatever your name is, if you give your passport there, and then they say, okay, fine, here you are, and we've processed for you a visa for a month or so, then stamp it, you get in. If Miguna then was in town today using that Canadian passport and a visa, then tomorrow he would be in court and go and make his case. He's not restricted to travel. And so what I'm saying is that the questions that we would need to ask, and I want to say to my colleagues here, in all fairness, that let us not try to equate the handshake to a blank agreement whereby anybody who is either in Jubilee or aligned to NASA can either disobey processes or law because there was a handshake. The handshake is generally a sign of goodwill between political players. And so if anyone is misinterpreting that handshake to mean that from now onwards there is no lawful procedure for any matters pertaining to Jubilee members or to NASA members, they're wrong. What in my view should be done in this drama is completely unnecessary. I think it's serving just purposes of show and then creating a profile, especially because I know Miguna and we've been with him on this panel. I would not shy away from saying I'm sure he's enjoying the drama. Because if we would be saying, I want to conclude with this point, the issue would be this on this table, that Miguna came, he arrived at the airport, not having his Kenyan passport, which was invalidated, then gave his Canadian passport and said, I've come to comply with that court order, and so this is my Canadian passport, allow me in. And then if now we're arguing this morning that despite of that, he was even denied a visa on that particular, while we are giving every other foreigner.
All right, thank you.
Then that would be that would be an issue.
All right, just briefly. So if I follow what you're really saying and your track of thought, is that Miguna Miguna did not actually follow the due process that is required. So if his passport was perforated here in the country, he should have applied for the passport in Canada.
No,
so when he's coming back, he has a Kenyan passport from Canada.
You see what I'm saying, Debarl, is that the court has ruled and given an order very clearly saying facilitate his re-entry, and when that order is given as to facilitate his re-entry, the way to facilitate in this circumstance
All right,
is
thank you.
let's give you a passport,
All right,
the one
all
that
right,
you have, come in,
we'll
and then,
come to
and then follow
thank
the
you.
rest of the process.
All right, let's hear from Otene very briefly, then we wind up on this.
You know, in recent times, Senator Matangi has become my friend. But my problem with him is that he believes in impunity and I don't. So I don't know how we'll work together. Let me clarify a few things.
Okay, let him, just give it.
Allow me to clarify a few
Let
things.
him have his head, let him
First of
clarify.
all, it must be made clear. I said that when the court directed, after 3 orders, that Miguna's passport be brought to court, in further breach of that order, the immigration department then shows up with a perforated passport,
yes,
which clearly cannot serve the purpose. And that is why the court made the further order that it is the obligation of the government to facilitate his coming back. That includes the direct obligation to issue him with travel documents, including a new passport. So it's not a question of saying that because it was invalidated, he couldn't come back. Secondly, it must be understood that there is no way Miguna would come in on a Canadian passport that is given a 6-month visa, because there are restrictions to that. First of all, after that period, you will then be required to leave. Secondly, you are restricted in terms of work. How can you allow Miguna into the country and say, first, you cannot participate in politics because those are restrictions that come with that visa. You cannot work. He's an advocate of the High Court in Kenya. So to accept that is to put yourself into a trap. But it is important to understand Article 14, Sub-Article 5 of the Constitution. Wamatangi makes a statement that I've heard a lot of people make, that people like Miguna, when they left, they denounced their Kenyan citizenship and therefore they needed to apply. First, Miguna has never renounced his Kenyan citizenship. When the immigration guys made that allegation in court, they were asked to prove it. They've never proved it. He's never signed the document. He's never uttered that anywhere, not in this country, not in Canada. Secondly, that is the very thing that Article 14.5, resolved. When you are writing the Constitution, there are those who say that if you are a citizen by birth and you cease to be a citizen, then you are entitled to apply. But we didn't say that. What Article 14.5 says that a citizen by birth is entitled on application. No one has the discretion of deciding whether or not to. It's on application. The fact that Miguna left in 1988 and yet has a current Kenyan passport means he applied. So he already complied with all that because it's on application. But it is important, lastly, to say this, that belittling things like this, and I've said this on this show, is very sad. You don't have to defend rogue public officials merely because you believe you're on the side of government. An offense is an offense, an illegality is an illegality. And where I disagree with Senator Cheruiyot is to say this is giving us a bad public image and all. If that is the image we have, then people must see it. Which is why there is no reason to clobber journalists who are merely covering the reality, as they did yesterday.
All right, and of course, in a moment we'll be speaking also to journalist Seth Olale to just give us a feel of how it was yesterday. Why were they clobbered? Is there any rhyme or reason why also the journalist also had to be, put through that harrowing torture that they went through yesterday? But let's hear from also Dr. Eseli, because you say, and he's totally denied, I think this is Senator Matangi, that we should not really hang together, the swearing in, the handshake, that it was very symbolic. With this particular incident that was happening yesterday. We saw also those clips, Raila Odinga was there, and we think maybe it's a figure of stability. But we need also to go back and find out what really brought all these things to crop out, right? Right now, why are we in this particular saga? Wasn't it because of the swearing in, right? And the handshake also is a culmination of all this drama that, yes, happened before and leading up to the swearing in, that now we have a sort of a happy medium between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Right Honorable Raila Odinga. So how can we, he says we should not add these things together, but how can we uncouple them? From your own estimation, do you think it can be uncoupled?
It's difficult to uncouple because this Miguna's return was a court order. It was a court order that he should be facilitated to return.
Yes.
And given that, then we expect that the government systems will therefore work to obey that court order. And also, in the process, there's been a handshake in between.
Yes.
So we expect much more goodwill than what we are seeing, because saying that Miguna renounced his Kenyan citizenship is not true. Miguna ran away from this country under very difficult circumstances and ended up in Canada. And being in Canada, he ended up with a Canadian passport. He did not renounce the Kenyan citizenship. So once he comes back and the courts have ordered so, he should be facilitated to, because he has a Kenyan ID, so the least they could have done was let him back into the country, and then they can process anything else they want later.
Thank you.
Instead of insisting, bring this Canadian passport, as Wakili Otienda Amolo said, once he gets a visa stamp in there, imagine this a Kenyan coming back to his country, but then he gets a stamp that restricts him, a visitor stamp that restricts him from what he can do and what he cannot do. And I think even the heavy security presence, was it necessary? I mean, it just gives us a bad image. And I think it's time we really looked at this matter seriously, because disobeying court orders, I don't think augurs well for this country. Because then the law is supposed to protect the weakest. Now, when the weak person has gone to court and actually obtained the court's order to ensure his rights are respected, and the state refuses to respect those rights, and imagine that's Miguna Miguna, who is known. What about the unknown person, the little person down there? What happens to that person?
Good question. Right.
You know, a very quick one, Debarl.
A quick one will be 30 seconds, please.
Sure, you know, but because
a quick one will be 30 seconds.
I want us to be clear and truthful about this. If a judge who is learned of the High Court uses the word to say that facilitate his re-entry, what is that judge saying? He says that he understands that there is a process that will require. I mean, that does not equal to giving an order saying let him walk through the airport with an ID.
Thank you.
To Debarl, we know, and me and you know, that an ID card is not an international travel document. How many people have you had stranded in China or other countries because they lost their Kenyan passports there?
Okay.
And lastly,
30 seconds over.
When you're saying, when you say, as Otiende Amolo says, that indeed that included the requirement that the government can give him a new passport, does that mean that you get a new passport without applying for it?
All right. Before we come to you, Jared, just a moment. Let me ask you.
You're given a new passport, but you apply for it.
I'm sorry to bat in. Let me ask you a probing question.
Please.
Then, how, from your own estimation, should actually the airport security, agents, how should they have reacted in the wisest of fashion? First of all, one was taking back Miguna and to actually deport him through Emirates. When the plane was taxiing and stopping the plane. Was that the wisest of fashion they should have acted? Secondly, why? Maybe there should have been a holding room to put Miguna Miguna and try and iron out all these kinks that we're having of the procedures and the processes that were not duly followed. Was the ultimate solution of actually deporting him the main one?
No, you see, that's the key thing, Debarl. That indeed you've asked a question, how should they have reacted? This is my view, that indeed what Miguna should have simply done is proffered those documents that he's got.
Fantastic.
His passport. Then, in the absence of that, there is nowhere where you will go, Debarl, in an international airport and cause drama and continue to dramatize there. You have to be removed.
No.
Because operations of the airport
forget about
continue.
the drama. No, just forget about the drama around it. I'm just asking in an unlikely situation that these things happen and we have no drama. Then how would you have reacted? Would you have taken back the person to deport him from wherever he's coming because there are no passports?
And that goes a long way to tell you that there was a lot of reservation, that there was a lot of holding back in how you treat him. Because if you ask me, if it was that bad, don't tell me
Thank you.
that the government does not have the means to go and lock him somewhere, or you don't see him.
All right, thank you.
So that means that he had latitude. There was fair freedom for him to exercise. And I think the problem is this, that we just want to highlight the drama, around him and show
All right, thank you.
as though
Thank you. All right,
there is a tussle, while the solution is very
Thank you.
simple.
Thank you very much.
Jared,
Jared,
get a visa,
let's hear
give
from
the
Jared.
documents they have, come back into the country if that's what the court order says, then apply for it. That's the matter that's in court.
Right.
Debarl, my friend Wamatangi, senator, is exposing us to splitting hairs. English language never changes its meaning. Facilitation also means production of a new passport to enable entry or re-entry into this country.
So it swings both ways.
Say that, facilitation does not necessarily mean giving him a new passport without application. In any event, if you're applying for a document, by the way, if you lose your ID and you go for reapplication and you have a copy of the original, that is enough for them to produce a new ID to you. Now, this same government is holding Miguna's passport, meaning then that they have all the details. If they wanted to produce a new passport and to just wait for Miguna to sign at the base, they could have done that long time ago. But, apart from the splitting hairs, which my friend is very good at, let's look at how this country has been rated internationally. The bad news gains a lot of currency as opposed to good news. Of course, we seldom have good news here in this country. But even if there were, they wouldn't be shown either locally or internationally. So I want to believe that apart from gaining acreage of spaces in our media,
Yes.
the international media would also be having the same about Miguna Miguna. So we are at a point when we are trying to build brand Kenya. Tourism is a very integral component of our economy. In fact, it is number 2 after agriculture, and perhaps it will, overtake, because the weather patterns and many things have changed, that our agriculture is not performing well. But if we are to target, developing our brand so that we, perpetuate the tourism sector and move it to the next level, and those whom we would want to go and sell the brand Kenya out there in terms of word of mouth, those who were held for over 3 hours in that Emirates flight, what kind of message are they taking out there?
Thank you. All right. Wamatangi, please. I'm sorry to bat you, Wamatangi.
Do you apply for your ID
Excuse
or
me.
you with a new ID?
All right, Wamatangi.
If you lose your ID, you go and
Thank you.
reapply for your
Right,
ID.
let's give it to
You're
Senator
not just
Aaron
giving.
Cheriot. Then we need to wind up on this. When
Well,
we come back, we'll hear from Seth.
Actually,
Then- yes.
I wanted to aid you. The title of your show is People and Politics, not Person. We've talked about this issue. I think everybody has made their opinion known.
Right.
We are taking unnecessarily too long. And there are more...
No, we need to
issues
clarify
that
these things.
we
We need, and the people is constituted of persons.
Yes,
so it is not
but
just a
we've made our
blanket.
point surely, Debarl.
You are the person that make the people.
Actually,
right?
you had already ruled that we listen to Seth Olale and we move
Yes,
on.
yes, we
that's
will.
That's what I just wanted to remind you.
All right.
That give us Seth.
Who is the moderator here? Please, you want to come back here and tell me how to control this show?
What Senator Cherorok is doing, he's donated his time to
Oh, you've just donated. Fantastic.
I've donated my time to Seth Olale.
One thing, though, Debarl,
Yes,
I
we
think
need to take a short break.
What we need to ask now is, now that Miguna did not board, then what happens? It appears to me there are 2 options. One is, if people like Senator Kimani Wamatangi believe that Miguna committed an offense by insisting on a court order, then they would have to take him to a Kenyan court, and we'll be there to defend him. And they can't charge him with anything meaningful because they were in breach. Or 2, not take him, and then we have to go to court yet again for what we call an order of habeas corpus, so that he can be produced in court, and then we deal with it.
All right.
And hoping 3, that the impunity does not be sustained, so that they try to deport him yet again.
All right,
I think
thank you.
those are the 3 options.
All right, and maybe just to remind also Aaron Cheriot, you think also the Daily Nation, if we just pick up the headline, wouldn't really dedicate also this, if it's just one person that we're talking about, a whole daily today has that particular story? What will you make about it?
Justice affects everybody.
Right, it does affect, and of course, if this is injustice to you, it can be an injustice to anyone.
I did not make light to the, of the tribulation.
I get you. I get you. Good morning, it's Seth.
Good morning.
Yes, thank you for joining us this morning. Right, just kindly, we've been talking about Miguna Miguna and what happened. Of course, we saw also the pictures as well. You were there. We saw you asking questions as well. But why were the journalists not really given full access yesterday?
Actually, it was a long day for journalists yesterday at JKIA. From as early as 12 p.m., some journalists had already arrived. So we covered the Miguna JKIA drama for over 8 hours. And it got worse when at around, after Raila had come in, trying to intervene over the situation, then all of a sudden there was heavy deployment. Police cars started coming into the airport. Then we were just doing our job. We're just, getting the pictures, covering. There was no announcement. No one ordered us to stop covering. No one told us to leave. Then all of a sudden, without a warning, we were just ambushed, surrounded all over by uniformed police officers who actually literally and brutally attacked journalists. And everyone was assaulted. And even the equipment, because most of the concern of the journalists there were the equipment, because some of the equipment, the live view units and the cameras, we had actually, some of them, we had kept them at the nearest restaurant, but they didn't even allow us to get them out. So they just told us, you must leave and leave immediately. And the guys who actually, the journalists who really suffered were our very own Robert Gishira, our cameraman, who actually was rushed to hospital yesterday at Nairobi Hospital, as well as Steve Leto, Citizen reporter.
We can see someone being actually from those particular pictures.
That is Steve Leto being carried
that is Steve
by
Leto.
journalists. Yeah, that is Steve Leto, Citizen's political reporter Steve Leto being carried. And actually, it was going to be worse. But you know what? In unison, journalists started screaming. We had photographers, we had cameramen kneeling down and lifting up their cameras and saying, finish us, we can't allow this to happen. So it is until that particular point that they started backing off. Because also the guys who are arriving, the tourists who are arriving, did not believe what is happening. They just, stood and they were watching. And so it was very unfortunate. We also had KTN, Sophia Wanuna, who was actually very wrongfully apprehended by uniformed police officers. So that is what happened yesterday. I'm told Steve Leto's condition is not very good. And he was.
So what really happened? Was he beaten black and blue, or what really happened to Steve Leto?
Steve Leto, it just happened, as you can see there. We were just outside the barrier where Miguna and his lawyers and the likes of Raila Odinga were being held. And all of a sudden, we were just covering that live on TV. All of a sudden, from nowhere, the police just came attacking everyone. And it was so unfortunate because it was a targeted ambush, because we were running away, and like you see the likes of Leto and also Robert Gishira, they were being attacked from behind, running away from the incident. Then a GSU police officer just follows suit and clobbers them repeatedly until we started screaming and saying that we won't allow this to go on. That is the point that they started backing away.
Right, and maybe if we may ask our panelist, if then this is not really an utter, impunity, then what do we call it, even to journalists, right? Why should we be actually barred from covering this as journalists? We are just conveyor belts. We just tell it as it is. Do you think also the treatment of a journalist? Right now we have Steve Leto, who is actually in critical condition because of what's really happened with the police officers yesterday. And I think we cannot really just gloss over these things and then we say, of course, we shall avoid the drama and the scene of Miguna Miguna. Someone is actually in the hospital.
We've reached that stage where maybe switching off the TVs and TV stations and so on is becoming embarrassing. So the idea now is to intimidate the journalists to the extent that they'll be fearful of covering such functions. I think that's the next stage now. that we've reached, because I don't see any reasonable explanation for what they did, apart from trying to ensure that this thing was not aired by disabling the journalists who were there, because I think switching off the stations has become too embarrassing, so they couldn't go that way. So the idea was to cut off the transmission by intimidating the journalists and disabling the journalists from actually airing what was going on. The idea is not to let Kenyans know what is transpiring in their own country, just to make sure that Kenyans have got no clue what's transpiring in their own country.
Just a clarification, Debarl. Yes. I saw Dennis Itumbe tweeting that journalists were ordered initially to leave or forget the JKIA premise. Just to clarify, no one told us to leave. There was no warning. It was just an ambush. If a commander would have come and told us, you're not invited here, you're not welcome here, leave immediately, journalists would have just picked the equipment and leave. But no one told us. It was just a brutal ambush.
Brutal ambush.
But, you know, let me comment on that. Two things. First of all, I think the word is absolute impunity. And for me, I hope that even as a media house, you will take appropriate action against the police, both personal for the injured journalist and collectively. Because journalists don't create news. They merely tell the world what is happening. They don't create what is that which is happening. Secondly, the question of ordering journalists to leave does not arise in my view. And I've said this before. The Kenyatta International Airport has restricted areas and it has public areas. Where the journalists were was a public area. If in the design of JKIA they didn't want people in the public area to know what's happening in the restricted area, they would not have put those transparent glasses. There is no way, and there was nothing wrong with the journalists being there. So in my view, even if they were ordered to leave, they were entitled to ask why, because that's a public area. But more importantly, I think, sometimes people might think that even if we were to have national dialogue, even if we were to have structured discussion, then we must tolerate things that are clearly unconstitutional. I do not believe in that. And I can tell you for one, that despite the national dialogue that we've agreed to, every time and all these actions by the police, by the immigration that transgress the constitution, we will seek justice for it. If in the course of that national dialogue, then that framework covers it, so be it. If it does not, then someone will have to pay eventually.
Someone will have to pay eventually. Let's say from Aaron Cheriot,
well,
very briefly.
Well, I'll be brief for sure. This is rather unfortunate if actually what we are viewing is anything to go by. Then I fear for the old good profession of journalism, because it will be the question in my mind is, what is it that drives a police officer to this level where you simply do not issue verbal orders and say, please walk away from this area, and resort to the kind of attacks that we are seeing being meted on our journalists? I think our police service, should needs to reevaluate and calculate from inside and get to understand that the people they serve include those they perceive to be in power and those not in power, because it is a service to the country. And when there is an issue as the standoff that was being witnessed last night at JKIA, then ideally what they are supposed to do is to restore order, not to bring disorder. And therefore what happened is really unfortunate. We say sorry to the journalists. I think, like Otiende has properly advised, maybe they should consider seeking legal redress on what was meted on them.
All right, and I think even the term service is a misnomer, because what we're seeing is just brutal force being, used here against the journalists. So we're still waiting for the police, for them to have, or the dawn of realization that they are a service and not a force, to actually get into their minds. Jared.
Well, let me at the outset say that today I owe this Honorable Cheriot tea.
No.
I think he must have been saved last night, because he's more objective today. Suffice to say, this government has a penchant for, fighting the messenger to distort the message. And you wonder, apart from the fact that Miguna had been there from 2:30 p.m., going to around midnight, and the press was there all through. What is it that they wanted to do that they never wanted the world to know? Did they plan to kill him? Did they plan to manhandle him? Of course they did. And more so that the Prime Minister was in that premises really puts into question the intent of Jubilee as regards police presence at the airport. But again, you know, even if the journalist did something that was so adverse that needed any kind of action, there are reporting channels. Journalism is a professional body with several agencies that regulate their conduct. And I don't think it was worth, manhandling and persecuting journalists who are actually doing their cardinal duty. So I think going forward, even as my brother Otiende has alluded, part of the deliberations that must be properly addressed with the handshake going forward is how to strengthen institutions, and judiciary is part of it. What we were treated to yesterday is a complete violation of what the judiciary decided many months ago. And today, we are reaping the benefits of non-compliance. So strengthening the judiciary, the first and foremost, will be key as we move forward with this kind of a thing. But again, if Jubilee wants to, set aside the Constitution and relegate this to a banana republic or employ the rule of the jungle, let us know. Because on their part, because they have monopoly of violence, we see them attack politicians, they attack journalists. The next thing they will do is to attack villagers in the village.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let's hear from Senator Matangi very briefly on this, the assault of journalists.
Yes, Debarl, I think the two issues, the issue of the drama in the airport regarding the conduct and allowing Miguna in, and the treatment of journalists by the police are two separate issues, very separate. And I want to say that I think it's high time that the quality and content of training of our police officers change and gets improved. That's a matter of fact, that we need to enhance the level, broaden the way our police officers are trained, so that then they can be able to catch up, one, with how trends move, two, with standards of treatment, and especially how to react in certain situations. Probably important in this issue to be able to say to, for example, the trainers or police officers, in the case of journalists, you see, the dissemination of information now has changed. Actually, before a journalist shoots with his camera and it is relayed here to the media house, there are thousands of people there who are already, taking those images and what's happening on small phones and sending it around. So stopping a journalist or beating them up would not make that content not go around. That would not be the issue. I think it is not only in yesterday's incident when we've seen police officers overreacting or using the wrong means. And so to me, it just boils down to how do we improve their training as a country such that they know when to employ what tactics to either control a situation or either to be able to impact what they think they requires to be known. For example, like in yesterday's incident, and we've seen this happening in many international or foreign institutions like that, where police officers can be able to move you from a scene like that without resorting to violence. And I think that's what needs to happen. But like I've said, for us to see with a clear eye where the problem is, we have to separate issues. This is not a question of Jubilee or NASA or ANC or who. This is a question of what standards do we want to set as a country for our institutions, for our people, for our entrusted officers?
Thank you.
What should they do in particular situations? Debarl, even if I'm not a journalist myself as a politician, I can be a victim. I've once been a victim. You remember when I was running for my campaigns in Kiambu, I just landed in Kiambu town, and I found a very, anxious police officer saying that I cannot walk there and talk to the people because nominations will be tomorrow, the following day. And I remember when I came to this show, you asking me, oh, what happened? You saw you got locked up. I hope maybe your memory is still clear. I was a victim of a similar scenario, somebody overreacting because they had my party then saying that there's a deadline to campaigning for nominations. You get what I mean? So
thank you.
It is not only in that kind of scenario where you get overreaction. So
thank you.
It is important that we look at the training parameters.
Thank you. I think we need to wind up on that, and also to thank Seth Olale. We wish Steve Leto also a quick recovery. Maybe your parting shots as we are winding up.
Yeah, the police should do better.
So where is, in fact, before we leave, where is Miguna Miguna right now? Is he still at the airport?
The report we have is that he didn't board the flight, and indeed the flight left. So his whereabouts is still not clear, but it is being believed that he's still in the country because he didn't board that particular plane. We have a senior journalist who was on board that plane, and he has confirmed to his respective station that indeed the plane left without Miguna Miguna.
Thank you. And of course, it's good to see you in mint condition as well, looking well. You're not really affected yesterday. So thank you very much.
I was going to say, you asked me about my parting shot. We're just approaching the World Freedom Day, and it's so unfortunate if these are some of the scenes being highlighted in journalism in this particular era.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And thank you so much for the good job you're doing.
Thank you.
We hope, of course, that you'll doggedly follow the story today, and of course, we'll get new developments from this as well.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.